Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Courage Effect. It's Suzanne. I'm thrilled to have you here as we are doing our final shows for 2024. Hard to believe that the end of the year is coming up so quickly. This is the second to the last show for 2024. And today's conversation is, they're all beautiful conversations, and I love bringing all of these people into your worlds. Today's guest is Roger Kastner, and this conversation is one that is inspiring, and I think it is a wonderful way to end the year. He brings a lot of great ideas to the table around ways that we can get unlocked, have the conversations that we need to be having with each other at work and ourselves at the same time, to be able to create the organizations and the workspaces where we are truly able to realize our best work. And his purpose, which he says, is to support people in realizing their potential. So this is a conversation about courage, about potential, and about challenging the status quo. Let me introduce you to Roger Kastner. He is an organizational development practitioner who works with leaders and teams to develop new ways of working that achieve business goals and create environments where people can thrive. He's also a leadership coach who works with clients to explore the things that are getting in their way. And he's the host of the What Do You Know to Be True podcast, where he chats with everyday people with extraordinary talent who make meaningful impact in the world. The goal of the show is to inspire coaches, practitioners, and leaders to work more deeply with others so that they can achieve a more purposeful and joyful life. Roger brings compassion, potential, courage, and joy to this conversation, and I'm sure that you're going to enjoy it. Thanks again for listening. Roger, a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to The Courage Effect.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time.
Thank you, as have I. And I've been listening to your podcast, and obviously we have some overlap in our professional worlds. Let's start with hearing a little bit about your definition of courage, and then I'll weave you into some of your work and how courage shows up for you on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I love that. So the first definition I work with is kind of similar to bravery, like doing something even though it scares you because you know it's the right thing to do. And in talking with a friend recently, she introduced another definition that's slightly different, but I still really, really love it. And she attributed it to Guru Singh. And it's, courage is loving something more than yourself.
Beautiful.
And I think there's elements of that are very true. That I find that when I am in service of my purpose, then these things that are, other people might say that I do that are courageous, don't feel like they're courageous because there's not friction there. I might acknowledge that there's some threat, there's some risk, but I know they're the right thing to do. So I'm all game to do them.
Talk to me more about your purpose.
So my purpose statement is I am unlocking my potential when I'm working with others to unlock their potential. And there is something I think, we might be able to put courage in the middle of that. Like I'm unlocking my courage when I'm working with others to unlock their courage, because it often takes courage to achieve the potential. If something is as grand as a potential, something as big as potential, that requires work, requires effort, requires discomfort in doing something that's outside of what we normally do or maybe equipped to do. So we have to stretch, we have to grow, and part of growing is being discomfort and like Brene Brown says, sometimes we get the mud on the face and trampled upon and all the fun stuff in the arena when you're on the floor looking up. And yet courage is that, I think, that thing that when it's in service of something bigger than ourselves, we get, that's what helps us rise 8 times after falling 7.
Mm.
There's so much disappointment that's in front of us. I'm thinking 20 years ago, I read Marcus Buckingham's First Break All the Rules, where he shared some of the work he did at Gallup, talking about people not being able to use 80% of workers not being able to use their strengths on any given day. And that strength being that combination of the thing they're good at and the thing that gives them energy. And that was so disheartening. That bummed me out. I remember exactly where I was when I was reading that, thinking 80% of people aren't able to use their strength. So how can we help them? How can I help as many people as I can get to a place where they're able to use their strength, where they're able to find meaning in what they do 40, 50, 60 hours a week? At the same time, I was doing project management for a technology firm that would say in our annual release, if 95% of the features we built did not succeed, but 5 of them did, if 5 of them drove new customers, new traffic, new revenue, that was a success. And yet my heart was breaking there of like, okay, 95% of the work that people do here isn't expected to actually achieve, the business goals, the objective. That's very disheartening for a lot of people who are doing a lot of hard work, who are doing the thing they love, but in an environment where it's not appreciated.
Is that what inspired you to get more involved in organizational development work, or were you already there? I mean, you mentioned PMing, but I'm just curious.
So yeah, the first half of my career was all about was doing project management and committing the sins that I'm now trying to correct. And our mantra within project management was all about scope, schedule, budget, which was true. Everyone cared about scope, schedule, budget until we launched something. And then once we launched it, no one cared about scope, schedule, budget. Does the user use and love the product? So then I was like, oh, user adoption is really important. Well, what does it take to get users to adopt the product? And it was often, you need to get users involved in helping you identify what are the problems to solve. Then you're it's kind of like cheating in a way. You're gaming the system of, hey, if the people whose success is your project's success is dependent on these people loving the product you build, well, how do you get them to love it at the start? And if you can do that, you're more likely to have your sponsors, your bosses very happy because you've figured out how to game the system. So then we're producing successful projects. Okay, now the people who are working on my teams are much more fulfilled because the projects we build have a high level of adoption, and therefore it's a successful project. The people I'm working for are happy because they're successful, and the people we're introducing product to, they're happy. And I started thinking, okay, well, why don't we do more of that? So that led to change management, that led to team effectiveness, that led to org design. It's kind of the basis of org development. So I kind of backdoored my way into org development, and it's kind of fun to have that project management experience because I now know what it's like for the clients I work with, the leaders I work with, the teams I work with. Like, I know where they're coming from. I've been there. I've committed a lot of those mistakes. And I've now worked with enough of them to be able to say it's possible to change the way they're working. And a lot of times changing the way they're working means we're actually taking on the status quo of how things are done around here, which is also the definition of culture, to do something to get people to believe that something is possible outside of how they do it every day. And this is where I think potential is part of the conversation, and definitely courage.
Okay, so you said one of my a big word for me, a buzzer word, which is status quo. I guess 2 words. And it's interesting that you said status quo is culture, because sometimes I think a culture's, yes, I mean it is operationalizing and sort of normalizing a set of behaviors and actions and thinking. But you also have, I mean, I love to disrupt the status quo. And I think that we really need to do that. And that's part of what my encouragement is. But it's not just disrupting it just for the sake of doing it, right? I mean, it's like Facebook had as one of their values, what, move fast and break shit. Um, like to a certain
Right.
extent, right? Then there's a certain point of how much are you wasting? You're almost wasting on the other side, right? I think then you're potentially falling into that 95%.
Mhm.
So how do you know if you're going so far, like if you want to listen to people, but you also can't answer all of the questions and the needs that everybody bring to you.
Mhm. Yeah, and I should say status quo is the predominant culture
Okay.
in that it's the dominant culture within whatever organization it is, and we
I
will
like that.
hear time and time again when we're working with organizations around, well, that's not how we do it around here. That's how we've always done it around here. And it's like, okay, yeah, and are you happy with the results? Because someone smarter than I said every organization gets exactly the results they're designed for. If we want to change the results, we got to change the way we're designed and how we operate and what we actually do from a day-to-day basis. And a lot of times that is threatening to people because that is moving them from an area of certainty to uncertainty. And that's part of what we get to do within that org development space is creating experiments and nudges to help people to go experiment with things and create psychological safety
Mhm.
that allows people to move into space to do things differently, to try them out, to get the support they need, and then to figure out how to make that new way of doing something sustainable and repeatable.
Mm. And I also like what you said when you started off by you were basically unwinding some of the sins that you had committed originally. So,
Yeah.
um, as you were redeeming yourself, there's there's a big part of OD work that is about us recognizing the patterns that we are perpetuating. How are we creating that status quo in a way that isn't necessarily serving us, right? So how are we potentially contributing to what is not necessarily best for the organization? And that to me that's unlocking, and that's incredibly that's scary, and that's courageous to do that. But it's not easy.
And yet, there are some things that we can do that are relatively easy. They just require a little time. The first is I spend a lot of time now trying to drive clarity into how work should be done, by whom, by when, to what result, and align to a vision that we all find to be compelling to actually start off in the first place with. And when we are mapping out the workflow, like if you've been involved in any process design work before,
Yep.
once you get current state designed on the wall, there's going to be people in the room saying, oh, is that how you do it? So you're instantly already driving clarity and you're identifying better ways of doing things. And if you align it to the vision of like, okay, so here's a better way of doing what we're currently doing, but we're not achieving the results we want, what needs to change? And by visualizing how work flows through the organization, where we're making decisions or not making decisions, where work is going from one group to another, and those handoffs are problematic. When teams are not not able to collaborate together, and it turns out it's not that the teams don't like each other, it's that they're getting different directions from their boss's boss's boss. There's no way they're going to work together when they're given different directions. So maybe we need to go have that conversation if we're being charged to correct the working between the teams. So the mapping of the work becomes so powerful because it just identifies a lot of the dysfunctions in organizations very quickly. Mapping out the work is one thing. The other thing I find to be really, really powerful is defining terms.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite terms in organizations to define is accountability. time and time again, I'll hear leaders say, we need to hold each other accountable, or we need to build accountability into the system. It's like, okay, when you say accountability, what do you mean? Because if there's 10 people in the room, we probably are dealing with 11 different definitions, all based on everyone's background and experience. Some of those backgrounds are going to be very positive and generative. Some of them are going to be really bad. And so, do we want to like shit hammer someone when they make a mistake? Or do we want to let someone make a mistake, identify that they made a mistake, identify their contribution to that mistake, and come up with a way of solving that mistake so they don't make it again and they can learn from the experience? Choice is up to us how we want to define that term. And yet, when we don't define it, we keep thinking it means something when it might mean something very different to someone else. And if it creates a threat response, they're not going to act with accountability. But if you create a way of, making it a reward response by allowing people to take on more responsibility, more accountability, and learn from their mistakes, yeah, I think a lot more people will sign up for that definition of accountability.
I love that you bring up accountability because I mean it's something that I've coincidentally I'm working on a lot right now with a certain group of clients that I'm working with. But I find that it's when we don't have accountability for exactly the reasons that you just talked about, we are accepting mediocrity.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that does have to come down to like what do we define as the standards? How do we co-create those standards for what we're looking to do? And I find that I'm coaching a lot of the people to have the courageous conversations with the people that aren't stepping into accountability. And it is that whole thing of like, how do I hold them accountable? And I'm like, well, how do we invite people into accountability? We need to change our relationship with accountability. So I love that you're talking about even
Oh,
just defining it.
I love the idea of inviting people into those behaviors. I have seen where you define behaviors, like behaviors around trust, around accountability, around
Mm-hmm.
conflict. And once you have a common definition, and it's like, okay, I know Suzanne believes this, and I believe it, and the other person believes it, then we can start like operating in that space because we know that's what's expected. And if we agree to a definition and yet Roger doesn't adhere to that definition, that's a different conversation. But until we define what's acceptable and what we're aligned to, then those conversations feel really difficult because it's a little bit of, I think most places people use the word accountability as a set of how do I punish someone
Yeah.
when they don't deliver the results. Well, that's really problematic because I don't know anywhere in modern work where one person is the sole contributor to success or failure or something. Like, all the work is done in teams, all the work is done together. So it doesn't seem necessarily fair to think there's a single throat to choke or chest to poke or whatever term you want to use. But if we just spend a little bit of time defining it, and it's so easy to define these words, it might not be easy to get people to agree, but once we do get them to agree, then adherent compliance is going to be pretty easy. And when someone is not acting above the line, it's really noticeable. And then you could have a conversation around like, hey, we agreed to this. You're not acting that way. What's going on for you? I'd like to invite you back above the line, but what's going on for you? And let's solve for that.
Yeah, and I think that's also the psychological safety piece is
Mm-hmm.
how do we really come to terms with, I mean, I'm working on some stuff right now, which is really about, we tend to go from either the desert where like we don't have emotions and we're just transactional to the nth degree, or we go into like the emotional swamp where we're all so emotional and there's so much going on that we're not necessarily able to get a lot done. I'm trying to work with people to be in the middle of that, right? And for myself as well, like how can I bring relationship to it, but how can I do it where it's in a way that I'm not like where I'm emotionally regulated, but I'm still asking for what I need. And that is really hard, especially when you're dealing with this swamp of everybody holding their own emotions at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. And I love this idea of like the emotional side. And then maybe lack of a better term, the technical parts of our job. Mm-hmm. And I would think some of these expectations around the work we do and how we do the work, the definitions of accountability or trust or conflict or whatever we want to define, the way we're going to make decisions and the approach that we agree to. There's these agreements, and then there's the emotional side. And when we have those agreements, I think it's easier to identify, is someone, are they adhering to those agreements, or are they having a moment? They're having a bad day, something else going on. And so when the more things we define, the more things that we have, as part of our agreements or our code, the easier it is to identify of like, okay, Roger's having a bad day. Like let's approach Roger with some affection and care and grace, or just let him go and do his thing, because he'll come back. But we can approach people of like, okay, they're not doing this thing that we agreed to. That means something. But if we don't have it defined, it's okay. Does Roger just not know how to be accountable? Does Roger not know what our agreements are? Does Roger not know how the way we do things around here? Is he being an adverse agent to our culture? Like a lot of options start coming up that may or may not be true. But if we, put some ground rules around this thing, it becomes easier to understand that we are emotional beings with thoughts. We're not thinking beings with emotions. Emotions are coming into every interaction we work with, and sometimes our better angels show up, and other times they don't. So we need to create ways of being able to identify that and hold space for each other.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said.
Thank you.
Where does courage come into that?
So with my purpose, I know I need to have conversations with leaders about this. I know I need to have facilitated conversations amongst teams to be able to talk about, these, either in the definition of these agreements or when there's been a violation of that agreement. And so people will tell me sometimes the things I do feel very courageous. And for me, it's like, no. I needed to tell that leader that they had spinach in their teeth or the equivalent of that, because that's going to help them show up better and work better with their leadership team, which is going to have impacts across the whole organization. So that, for me, it's really easy to do. But where courage shows up is for that leader to be able to receive that perspective, that feedback, and to be able to, make the choice of what they're going to do with it. And so when I'm aware of what I'm doing, when I'm giving feedback, when I'm, telling them that they have spinach in their teeth, I need to be aware that they're having a moment that they can choose courage, or they can choose to be defensive. They can choose to go back to the old behaviors. They might agree to the behaviors, the good behaviors in the room, but then go back to what they normally do. And it's a courage moment for them. And so I think I need to be better cognizant of, okay, when I'm telling the leader, when I'm giving them feedback of like, hey, that time you told your 800 person organization that they're family, yeah, no, that's probably not a good thing. And there's a lot of reasons why, but tell me what you're trying to achieve. And let me tell you why it could potentially be a bad thing. And then we could talk about, like, are there opportunities to do it differently? Or, a leader that I had this recently, a leader, we're in a workshop, and anytime he was the first person to talk, anytime I'd float a question, he was the first person to talk. He would only look at me when he was talking. And then he didn't ask any questions of anyone else in the room. And so I, knowing that behavior, all three of those behaviors, was probably noticeable by the rest, by his leadership team. Um, I painted the picture for him and asked, hey, when you've been in that position where your leader's focusing on, someone else, when they're not asking questions and when they're the first ones to jump in, what are your reactions? And the leader had almost no idea what I was talking about. It was a little bit like, what would I do? How would I feel? And so we had to go through it a little bit, but he came around to saying, yeah, though, I should probably wait. I should probably, because we've all heard the advice, like the leader should be the last one to talk. Get the opportunity to listen to everyone. Ask more questions than you're telling. And so they know the right behavior. I'm very curious to see what happens next time we're in one of these workshops, if they're able to ask questions and keep the conversation going and be interested in what other people have to say. If they're able to do that, then I absolutely need to go and give them kudos for that. Got to reinforce the right behavior and say, hey, I saw what you did. And that probably has a really positive impact.
I like that you're also addressing the courage to listen to it, but also then the courage to integrate it, to decide if they want to actually take the action and make the choice of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Roger, we definitely have more to talk about, but we need to pause for a quick break from our sponsors. So everybody, thank you for listening. This is The Courage Effect. We will be right back. These are challenging times. Sometimes it can take a good dose of courage just to get out of bed. When life becomes hard, it's vital we seek support from trusted, experienced people. If you're going through a hard time, working with a therapist can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and accessible. It's an online platform where you can be matched with a professional therapist in as little as a few days. You can find out more information and get matched with a therapist at BetterHelp, that's HELP.com/courage. Visiting this link both supports this show and gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Welcome back to The Courage Effect, where I continue my conversation with Roger Kastner. You're bringing something to mind for me, Roger. I've been reading Dr. Jamil Zaki's Hope for Cynics book, where he's really talking about hopeful skepticism versus cynicism. And you're making me think about like positive skepticism, right? The idea of not just being like blindly optimistic, but also bringing in some knowledge, but still bringing in some positivity and really looking at potential. I just put that out there as something that, as you think about the hope, I like that I'm feeling the more of the optimistic positivity from you in a good way, not in a blinded rainbow toxic way, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. And I think I've been accused of, I had a client once said, I can't tell the difference between glasses half full and half stupid, which I do have a list of all the wonderful things that clients have said to me over the years, because one, they're just so funny. And it's so much more about them than it is about me. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice little reminder. I think I have wild mood swings between optimism and cynicism. Maybe earlier in my career, I had more skepticism of what's possible. But I have learned to subcontract that out to my clients and the people I work with. They will tell me where the no is. They will tell me what they're not able to do. And I'm just going to keep, trying to align. Hey, this is what you want to achieve. These are the actions that can help you get there. Choose the one you want to get, the one you want to do if you want to get to this thing. Yeah, I have a friend that recently told me he admires how optimistic I am. I see something and I just go do it. And I don't let things get in my way. I don't let the doubt, the uncertainty, and the voices in my head. And that could be because the voices in my head are saying, go for it. Like, this is going to be awesome. And And maybe, there's probably a couple people in my life that appreciate if I did have a couple gremlins in my head saying, maybe you need to stop and think about before you jump in there. I know about a year ago, I started a new job. I started a coaching program, and I started the podcasts that I host all in basically the same week.
Wow.
And starting wasn't a problem. But now I found myself in what, Joseph Campbell would refer to as the messy middle of all those things. It's like, okay, how do we sustain momentum in the middle? It's easy to start. And so there's a little bit, I'm going through this process of like, am I still hopeful on these? Am I still optimistic about all three? Yeah, more so than others for one of the venues versus the other. But I still see potential in all of them. And that, I think that's the thought I have when I get out of bed in the morning of like, what's the potential? What's going to drive joy for me and the people I work with? And how can I show up in the best way to serve the people I work with? Because that's the best way to serve myself.
Mm, that's a great anchor. And I love that that's something that's keeping you going as you're going through the messy middle, or the various, all the various stages. But I love the idea of potential. What potentially can come of this? And how do we
Mm-hmm.
open up to what it might be? And I'm curious for you. So your podcast is called What Do You Know to Be True? Talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit about that, because that to me, there's definitely potential in there. And as I listen to it, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the podcast.
So the name What Do You Know to Be True actually came out of, it was a conversation at book club where one of our members was just sharing like some really like hard things going on in their life. And then one of my dearest, closest friends asked this person, what do you know to be true? And I'm shocked, like, wide eyed, mouth agape. How could you ask that question? This person just told you like some really hard things that they're dealing with. And you're asking them, what do they know to be true? Like, what's wrong with you? This is all in my head. And in the like half second, all those thoughts are going in my head. The person responds with just these beautiful truths of what's true for her. And I'm just blown away. Like, what do you know to be true? Like, everyone has their own truth. And in the moment, something can be true, and the next moment, it's not. I mean, I think of truth as something of like, to some extent, a little bit of the story we're telling ourselves, the principles upon which those stories we tell ourselves. Whereas, facts, science can prove out facts, or there's dates and blah, blah, blah. But truths feel much more temporary
Mm-hmm.
and moldable. And so I have a lot of fun with the idea of using this as the basis of this, the name for this podcast, because I really want to know the people that I'm interviewing who, everyday people with superpowers, extraordinary talent, making meaningful impact in the world. I'm already inspired by them. For them to, many of them have found the thing that is, their superpower that gives them so much joy, makes so much impact that they want to do that full time. They've actually started their own business, so they found a role that they can do that majority of the time, and they go out and do great work in the world and making the place a better place for all of us. Love that so much. I want to understand how they got to that place as a way of inspiring me to get better at what I do, to have more impact of what I do. But I also think it's a wonderful opportunity to maybe share this with more people and hopefully inspire other people to maybe lean into a little bit of like, okay, what is their extraordinary talent and what could they do to increase the impact on other people? I find that this podcast is a way of just amplifying these everyday people, extraordinary talent, making meaningful impact, talking about purpose. And so the first year has really been focused on purpose. And then it was like, okay, purpose is like a North Star. Purpose is definitely a journey, not a destination, but it's really directional. We already got the superpower. Like, okay, what else does it take with that superpower for one to achieve self-actualization or to live into their potential? And so I've been playing around with some other ideas. And so I'm about to make a pivot with the podcast to go. The next season is the next component, the pillar of potential, which the pivot's going to be to joy. And joy not only being an outcome, but to actually be a motivator.
I'm curious to hear the larger season of the show, because I do think that I think there's a lot more conversation about joy now. I think it's been one of those things in the past that's been a bit saccharine, that people, it's almost like the toxic positivity thing, right? There's just a certain amount of, it feels a little maybe self-indulgent, or at least it's been shrink wrapped to self-indulgent, but I don't see that at all. I think it's a core feeling and emotion that we all have to have, right? Because why not? If we can't have joy, why the hell are we doing it? As we wrap up this larger conversation, thank you for bringing a real powerful, I believe, dialogue around bringing more courage to work and bringing more potential at the same time as a result of that. And you really making that your life's work of looking at in yourself and with other people and bringing that every day, because that is not easy to do. But I appreciate you doing the work, bringing it, having the conversations in order to hopefully stoke the fires that make that happen, as opposed to just knowing that it's going to happen, because there's influencing that happens in there. There's faith that I think happens in that, and hard work.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for the work you're doing here on the Courage Effect, because I truly believe so much more is possible when we act with courage. And when we see people sort of turn that corner from acting out of threat to acting with courage, we see them thrive more. And it is contagious when we see other people acting with courage. So this big question, there's sort of the mental exercise of what would you do if you weren't afraid? Which is another way of saying, what would you do if you were courageous in this moment? And I think we would all live more fulfilled, valuable, joyful, meaningful lives. And the impact it has on others just seems, love the whole notion of the Courage Effect, because I think it does ripple outward. Love the work you're doing. And thank you so much for having me on today.
Thank you, Roger. Right back at you. And I'll make sure that I get all of your podcast and everything else in the show notes. And you keep doing the show, because I'm really enjoying it. So thank you for being here. Thank you for a great conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
The Courage Effect is brought to you by Weller Collaboration. If you're looking to enhance your leadership skills or get more comfortable with change, please reach out to us. Our team of coaches, advisors, and consultants would love to help you get out of your comfort zone, operate in a braver brain space, and achieve even more amazing results. More information about Weller Collaboration is available in the show notes. Please spread the word about the Courage Effect. Rate and review on your favorite podcast platform, and we would love for you to share with your colleagues, family, or anyone in your universe who could use a good dose of courage. If you have feedback or would like to apply to be a guest, please reach out to us via our website, thecourageeffect.com. Lanny Mathers is our producer. Dave Nelson composed our theme music. Alex Sandyforth is our administrative maven, and I'm your host, Suzanne Weller.